The morning alarm echoed through the suburban neighborhood in Connecticut. Emily Harrison opened her eyes in the dim bedroom. 6:30 a.m., the usual time. In the bed next to her, her husband Michael was still in deep sleep. Emily wasn't a morning person. Especially on days when important business negotiations were ahead, she felt like there was a heavy stone in the pit of her stomach. Today could be a major turning point in her real estate career. She had been assigned to handle a large development project in the Westfield district, with the final presentation scheduled for this afternoon. If successful, the promotion to senior manager she had been aiming for years would become reality. On her way to the kitchen, she passed by 10-year-old Jacob's room. She could still hear his sleeping breath. Every time she saw his sleeping face, Emily's heart warmed. Jacob resembled his father Michael with his well-formed features. But his personality took after his mother. He was an introverted and thoughtful child. While turning on the coffee maker, Emily organized today's schedule in her head. Final document review at 9 a.m., team meeting at 11, client presentation at 2 p.m. The results should be known by evening. Feeling her hands trembling slightly from nervousness, she poured coffee into her mug. She heard footsteps coming up the stairs. Michael appeared in the kitchen with sleepy eyes. Her husband worked as a business consultant and often worked from home. Still in his pajamas, he sat in a chair and let out a big yawn. "Good morning, Emily. Today's the big day, isn't it?" Michael's voice had that morning hoarseness. He seemed to understand his wife's nervousness. Throughout their 12 years of marriage, Michael had always supported Emily's work. Especially regarding childcare, he often took the lead, and Emily was grateful for that. "I'm working from home today, so leave Jacob to me," Michael continued after taking a sip of coffee. On his work-from-home days, it was their family custom for him to handle everything from preparing Jacob's breakfast to seeing him off to school. Emily breathed a sigh of relief. She didn't want to be distracted by family matters today of all days. "Thank you. That really helps." Just then, light footsteps came running down the stairs. Jacob appeared in his school uniform. His brown hair was sticking up with bedhead, but his eyes were bright. "Good morning, Mom." "Good morning, Dad." Jacob's cheerful voice echoed through the kitchen. Unable to hide his excitement, he began talking while wolfing down his breakfast cereal. "I was chosen as the anchor for the relay at next week's sports day. The teacher said I'm the fastest in the class." Seeing her son's delighted expression, Emily couldn't help but smile. However, somewhere in her heart, this afternoon's presentation wouldn't leave her mind. Maybe she should go over the materials one more time. "That's wonderful, Jacob." Emily answered absent-mindedly while checking the documents in her bag. Michael noticed this and turned to their son. "Speaking of sports day, I had preparations to do as PTA president." At Michael's words, Emily stopped what she was doing. This was the first time she'd heard that her husband was PTA president. When had he taken on such an important role? "What? You're PTA president? Since when?" At Emily's surprised voice, Michael showed a slightly troubled expression. "Since last fall. You've been busy with work, so I've been handling it. School matters, communication between parents, event planning. It's quite a lot of work." Listening to Michael's explanation, Emily felt something heavy in her chest. While grateful to her husband for being so involved in their son's school life, she felt guilty about not being aware of what was happening with her family. When had she become so distant from her family? "Mom's working hard, isn't she?" Jacob's innocent words pierced Emily's heart. Her son understood and accepted his mother's busyness. But was that really a good thing? Looking at the clock, it was almost time to leave. Emily hurriedly stuffed the necessary documents into her bag. "I think I can come home early tonight, so let's have a family dinner," Emily suggested, as if trying to clear her guilt. Recently, opportunities for the three of them to eat together had decreased. If today's presentation was successful, she would surely have more peace of mind. Yay! I get to eat dinner with Mom. Jacob jumped with joy. Seeing that pure happiness, Emily once again realized the importance of family. While putting on her shoes at the entrance, Emily looked back. Michael was preparing Jacob's lunchbox and fixing his son's bedhead. He was the perfect father. Being able to leave her family to her husband and concentrate on work with peace of mind was truly something to be grateful for. Do your best today. Michael called out gently. Emily smiled back and left the house. Once alone in the car, nervousness about the afternoon presentation washed over her again. But at the same time, she found herself looking forward to tonight's family dinner. The office of Harvard Realty, where Emily worked, was on the 15th floor of a 20-story building in downtown Hartford, Connecticut. Arriving early to avoid the morning rush, Emily was alone in the quiet office, making final checks on today's presentation materials. The Westfield District Large Development Project was a massive $50 million deal. It was a mixed development including residential areas, commercial facilities, and recreational facilities, and if successful, it would bring the company its largest profit ever. Emily had literally worked day and night for the past 6 months for this project. Good morning, Emily. Today's the big day. Her colleague Sarah Williams approached with a warm cup of coffee in hand. Sarah served as a senior manager in the sales department. She had built her career while raising 2 daughters and was a good advisor for Emily. Are you nervous? At Sarah's question, Emily gave a wry smile. Of course. But the preparation is perfect. Market research, profit projections, risk analysis, everything's ready. Emily answered while showing the materials. Indeed, the numbers were perfect. However, with large projects, there were many factors that couldn't be determined by numbers alone. Client relationships, trust, and luck were also necessary. At 9 o'clock, the office was full of energy. Emily's team members arrived one by one, and the final strategy meeting began. Jim from marketing, Lisa from finance, and David from legal. The proposal that the 4-person team had refined over 6 months had become a masterpiece of over 100 pages. The client's biggest concern is building relationships with local residents, Jim opened the meeting. Environmental consideration and harmony with existing communities. We should put this front and center. Lisa supplemented from the financial perspective. Budget-wise, phased development can minimize initial investment risk. We must emphasize this point. Listening to her team members' discussion, Emily was organizing the flow of the final presentation in her head. In the meeting starting at 2 p.m., she would make the proposal as the team's representative. If successful, the path to senior manager, her long-held dream, would open. When the team meeting ended, Emily decided to have lunch alone. At a small cafe near the office, while ordering a sandwich, she was thinking about her family. Jacob's happy smile this morning, Michael's kind words. She was looking forward to tonight's family dinner. Recently, with work being busy, the time spent with family had decreased, and Emily felt sorry about that. When she had finished about half her lunch, a message arrived on her phone. It was from Michael. I'm going to be busier than expected today. Go ahead and have dinner without me. I'll be late. Emily stared at the screen and put down her fork. Had Michael forgotten about the family dinner they had promised this morning? Or was work taking priority? For Emily, tonight's family time was as important as the afternoon presentation. She tried to write a reply but couldn't find the right words. She couldn't blame her husband. He was working hard at his job too. In the end, Emily only replied, "Understood. Take care." However, a small disappointment remained in her chest. Returning to the office, final preparations for the afternoon presentation began. Setting up the conference room, checking the projector operation, printing handout materials. Everything was proceeding smoothly. However, Emily's mind couldn't completely concentrate on work. Michael's message wouldn't leave her head. "Emily, are you okay?" Sarah called out with concern. "I'm just a little tired. Once today's presentation is over, I'm sure I'll feel better." Emily answered with a forced smile. "Take care of your family too," Sarah said gently. "I once had a period when I was young where I was obsessed only with work and sacrificed time with my family. But children grow up in the blink of an eye. Treasure the present." Sarah's words resonated deeply in Emily's heart. Indeed, recently, time to talk slowly with Jacob had decreased. Wasn't she missing her son's growth? At 1:30 p.m., the clients arrived at the conference room. Robert Chambers, representative of the Westfield Development Group, and his associates. A total of 5 important people. Emily took a deep breath and remembered all her preparation. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules today." Emily began her greeting in a calm voice. Just before the presentation started, her phone vibrated. It was a call from the school. However, she absolutely couldn't answer the phone now. Emily ignored the call and continued with the presentation. "Regarding the Westfield District Development Plan, I would like to introduce the innovative approach we are proposing." Using slides, Emily continued her enthusiastic explanation. Market research results, profit projections, environmental considerations, cooperation with local residents. Everything was perfectly prepared. The clients also seemed to be listening with interest. 15 minutes later, her phone rang again. It was from the school again. Anxiety crossed Emily's mind, but she couldn't interrupt the presentation. This project was extremely important for her career. "I would like to explain in detail the financial advantages," Emily continued. However, in a corner of her mind, she was concerned about the call from school. Had something happened to Jacob? But Michael was there, so it should be fine. When the presentation reached its climax, the conference room door suddenly opened. Emily's secretary, Melanie, entered with a pale face. "I'm sorry, Ms. Harrison, there's an emergency call." Melanie's expression was serious. She wasn't the type of person who would normally interrupt a meeting for any reason. "Excuse me. It seems to be an important matter, so could you give me a moment?" Emily apologized to the clients while following Melanie. Once outside the conference room, Melanie told her in a low voice. "Your child has been taken to the emergency room. They can't reach your husband." Emily's head went blank. Jacob was taken to the emergency room. What on earth had happened? "I'm going to the hospital immediately," Emily answered in a trembling voice. "What about the presentation?" At Melanie's question, Emily hesitated for a moment. The large project she had prepared for 6 months. It should have been the turning point of her career. However, when something was happening to her son, she couldn't possibly continue working. "Have Sarah take over. I'm going to the hospital right now." Emily returned to the conference room and explained the situation to the clients. Fortunately, Mr. Chambers showed understanding. "Your child comes first. The presentation can be rescheduled." Emily expressed her gratitude and hurriedly left the office. In the car, she called Michael's cell phone with trembling hands. It wouldn't connect no matter how many times she tried. Where was he and what was he doing? On the way to the hospital, Emily was blaming herself. She regretted ignoring the call from school this morning. If she had answered the phone then, she might have been able to rush to her son's side sooner. She wanted to take care of both work and family, but had she ended up being half-hearted about both? While waiting at a traffic light, she called Michael again. This time it connected. "Jacob has been taken to the emergency room." Come to the hospital immediately. Emily desperately explained the situation. However, Michael's reaction was completely different from what she had expected. Wasn't today your turn to pick him up? The child is your responsibility. Michael's voice over the phone was cold and distant, far from the worry and agitation Emily had expected. Despite the emergency of their son being taken to the hospital, her husband's first words were shifting responsibility. Michael, what are you saying? Jacob has been taken to the hospital. Come immediately. Emily pleaded in a trembling voice. However, Michael's reaction confused Emily even more. I'm in an important meeting now. You handle it. That's a mother's job. The phone was hung up unilaterally. Emily stared at her phone, unable to believe it. That her husband, with whom she had been married for 12 years, would show such a cold reaction to their son's emergency. Parking at St. Mary's Hospital, Emily hurried to the emergency department. When she gave her son's name at reception, the nurse guided her to the pediatric ward. Walking down the corridor, the worst scenarios were floating in Emily's head. Ma'am, this way. In the hospital room the nurse showed her to, Emily found Jacob. Her son was lying in a hospital bed receiving IM4, but his consciousness seemed clear. Mom. When Jacob saw Emily, he waved weakly. His voice was smaller than usual, and his complexion was pale. Jacob, are you okay? Does anything hurt? Emily rushed to her son's bedside and held his small hand. Jacob's hand was cold and trembling slightly. My head hurt really bad, and I felt sick. But I feel a little better now. Hearing her son's weak voice, Emily's chest tightened. Dr. Anderson, the attending physician, entered the room. You're Miss Harrison, aren't you? We need to discuss your child's condition. Dr. Anderson had a gentle but serious expression. He began explaining while holding the test results. Your child was showing symptoms of acute drug poisoning. Blood test results detected sleeping pill components. It took Emily time to understand the doctor's words. Drug poisoning. Sleeping pills. There was no way Jacob would ingest such things. That's impossible. Jacob isn't the kind of child who would take such medication. Emily desperately denied it. However, the doctor's expression didn't change. Ma'am, this may not have been an accident. We may need to contact the police. At the doctor's words, Emily's blood froze. Not an accident. What did that mean? Leaving the hospital room, Emily called Michael again. This time she pressed the numbers with trembling hands. She had to make her husband understand the seriousness of the situation. Michael, this is serious. Jacob has drug poisoning, and the police may get involved. Come immediately. However, Michael's reaction was no different from before. Drug poisoning. That's ridiculous. It's because your supervision was poor. He probably ate something strange at school. At her husband's cold words, Emily was speechless. Normally, as a father, he should be worried and rush to the hospital immediately. You take responsibility and handle it. I'm busy. The phone was hung up again. Emily stood alone in the corridor. In the 12 years since their marriage, Michael had never been this cold. Something was wrong. Just then, two police officers appeared at the hospital entrance. A middle-aged male detective and a young female detective. Are you Miss Harrison? I'm Detective Davis, and this is Detective Wilson. Detective Davis introduced himself in a calm voice. Regarding your child's case, we need to confirm some things. We need to investigate what happened at school. Emily followed the police officers. They said they were going to the school. In the car, Detective Wilson explained the situation. Your child suddenly became ill around 11 a.m. When the homeroom teacher found him, his consciousness was hazy. 11 a.m. Emily organized the time in her head. At that time, she was having a team meeting at the office. Michael was working from home, and Jacob should have been at school. Arriving at Elmwood Elementary School where Jacob attended, Principal Mrs. Robinson greeted them with a worried expression. "Miss Harrison, is Jacob okay? We're all very concerned." The principal was a woman in her 60s who had been watching over children at this school for many years. An unusual tension was visible on her face. "Ma'am, please look at this." Detective Davis guided Emily to the principal's office. A large monitor was set up there, ready to play security camera footage. This is footage from the school's security cameras. It shows the corridor in front of the faculty room around 11 a.m. When the detective operated the remote control, a black and white image appeared on the screen. Several adults could be seen walking in the corridor. They were parents who had come to school for PTA activities. "Please pay attention here." The detective pointed to part of the screen. In the center of the footage, Jacob could be seen. Her son was walking alone in the corridor, and nothing unusual was visible. And in the next moment, Emily's heart almost stopped. What appeared on the screen was unmistakably Michael. Her husband approached Jacob and handed him something. It looked like a small plastic bottle. "What time is this footage from?" Emily asked in a trembling voice. 11:05 a.m. At the detective's answer, Emily's head was confused. Michael had said he was working from home, so why was he at school? And what had he given to Jacob? The footage continued. Jacob was drinking the contents of the plastic bottle he had received from Michael. Her son drank without hesitation, with a completely trusting expression toward his father. What did the father give to your child? At Detective Wilson's question, Emily couldn't answer. Various possibilities were racing through her head, but all of them were things she didn't want to believe. The footage continued further. After Jacob finished drinking, Michael lightly patted his son's head and left. It looked like a heartwarming scene between a normal father and child. However, 10 minutes later, something terrible happened. Jacob suddenly began to stagger. Her son tried to support himself by putting his hand against the wall, but gradually his footing became unsteady. Then he collapsed in the corridor. At this point, where was the father? Detective Davis asked calmly. Emily stared at the screen, feeling like she couldn't breathe. Rewinding the footage, Michael could be seen disappearing down the corridor without looking back, even as Jacob began to suffer. For the 15 minutes until her son collapsed, no one noticed. Jacob suffered alone until the homeroom teacher discovered him. Is this a coincidence? At Detective Wilson's words, Emily couldn't answer. For a coincidence, the timing was far too perfect. Can you contact the father? We need to ask him about the circumstances. At Detective Davis's request, Emily took out her phone with trembling hands. However, Michael's phone wouldn't connect. Ms. Harrison, this is just one possibility, but if this was an intentional act, it's a very serious situation. The detective's words weighed heavily on Emily's heart. Intentional act. That meant her husband had deliberately put their son in danger. Leaving the principal's office, Emily's feet felt as heavy as lead. She couldn't believe that the husband she had trusted for 12 years would harm their beloved son. However, security camera footage doesn't lie. On the way back to the hospital, Emily was blaming herself. Looking back at her husband's behavior this morning, there were indeed several unnatural points. Not knowing he was PTA president, being at school while saying he was working from home, and his abnormal coldness toward their son's emergency. All the points were beginning to connect. However, Emily still didn't want to believe it. That her beloved husband would hurt their beloved son. Arriving at the hospital, Detective Davis told Emily, "We would like to ask the father to voluntarily accompany us. We need to hear the details of the circumstances." Emily nodded silently. At 6 p.m., Michael Harrison maintained a calm expression in the interrogation room at the police station. Detective Davis and Detective Wilson sat across from him, and a monitor ready to play the security camera footage was placed in a corner of the room. "Mr. Harrison, could you explain about this footage?" Detective Davis asked while pointing to the footage. On the screen, the scene of Michael handing Jacob a plastic bottle was displayed. "I just gave my son a nutritional drink." Michael's answer was matter-of-fact, as if he were talking about an ordinary daily occurrence. "A nutritional drink? Your child was taken to the hospital afterward with acute drug poisoning. Blood tests detected sleeping pill components." At Detective Wilson's pointing out, Michael didn't move an eyebrow. "That must be a management error by the school. What I gave him was a commercially available nutritional drink. There may have been a problem with the school lunch or drinking water." Michael's calmness was abnormal. Even though his own son had been on the brink of life and death, he was talking as if it were someone else's business. The detectives exchanged glances. "Mr. Harrison, you have life insurance on your child, don't you?" At Detective Davis's question, Michael's expression changed slightly. "Yes, it's a father's responsibility. Considering the worst-case scenario. Isn't $10 million too large an amount for a 10-year-old child?" When Detective Wilson pressed him, Michael showed signs of agitation for the first time. "It's an investment in the future. Considering educational expenses too." The detectives presented further investigation results. Michael's bank account statements, credit card usage history, and records of large fund outflows to online casinos. "Over the past year, you've accumulated $750,000 in debt. Most of it is from gambling," Detective Davis announced while laying out documents. "That has nothing to do with work." Michael answered desperately, but his voice had lost the composure from earlier. "It does have something to do with it. A man in financial difficulty from debt repayment took out a $10 million life insurance policy on his son and tried to kill him with poison. This is a clear motive." At Detective Wilson's words, Michael's mask finally began to crumble. "Do you have evidence?" "I love my son. We have evidence." Detective Davis took out new documents. "It has been discovered that sleeping pills are missing from the school infirmary. The date they went missing was 3 days ago. And on that day, you were the only one who entered the infirmary as PTA president." The color drained from Michael's face. He thought it was a perfect plan, but evidence was piling up one after another. "Furthermore, we recovered the plastic bottle you gave to your child. Fingerprint analysis detected your fingerprints. And from residual components, it was confirmed that sleeping pills had been mixed in." When Detective Wilson presented the decisive evidence, Michael sank deep into his chair. "There's more," Detective Davis continued. "Your computer search history. Child sleeping pills lethal dose, school accident compensation, life insurance payout conditions. These searches have been conducted frequently since 3 months ago. All of the plan he thought was perfect was being exposed." Michael sighed deeply as if he had given up. "I understand." Michael's voice was full of resignation. "I was planning it. But I didn't intend to kill him. I just intended to make him sick and blame the school, then demand compensation." The detectives looked at Michael in disbelief. Compensation was the only purpose. What about the $10 million life insurance? That was. I had the insurance money in mind too. But I really didn't intend to kill him. Michael's excuses rang hollow. You were calculating the amount of sleeping pills, weren't you? You have search history for looking up lethal doses. At Detective Davis's pursuit, Michael finally confessed. It was supposed to be the perfect crime. Sue for the school's management error, and in the worst case, insurance money too. It was a plan to get money twice. Silence fell in the interrogation room. Even the experienced detectives were at a loss for words at the confession of a father who tried to exchange his son's life for money. Why? Why your own son? Detective Wilson asked with incomprehension as a human being. The debt kept growing. I didn't know what else to do. I feel sorry for Jacob. But I couldn't think of any other way. Michael's words didn't show any true remorse. Rather, frustration at the plan's failure seemed stronger. In another room, Emily watched the interrogation through a monitor, tears streaming down her face. That the husband she had lived with for 12 years had tried to sacrifice their beloved son for money. It must be painful, but I think it's good that you were able to learn the truth. Jennifer, the hospital's social worker, spoke gently. I didn't notice anything. My husband's debt, the insurance money on my son, I didn't know any of it. I'm a failure as a mother. Emily blamed herself. You're not at fault. He was systematically hiding everything. Jennifer consoled her. I recommend proceeding with divorce proceedings. To protect your child too. That night, Emily sat next to Jacob in the hospital. Her son hadn't completely recovered yet, but his consciousness was clear. Mom, isn't Dad coming? At Jacob's innocent question, Emily's heart felt like it would break. How could she explain to her son that the father he thought loved him had actually tried to kill him? Dad is busy with work right now. Emily lied. Someday she would have to tell the truth, but not now. I remember Dad had a scary face. Jacob said in a small voice. What kind of face? Not Dad's usual face. A cold, scary face. At her son's words, Emily shuddered. Children might sense more than adults think. The next day, Michael was formally charged with attempted fraud and attempted murder. Bail was denied, and he would be detained until trial. His lawyer sought leniency, but given that it was premeditated and the victim was his own son, a heavy sentence was expected. Emily began divorce proceedings. Her 12-year marriage to Michael was coming to an end. There were issues of property division and custody, but Jacob's safety was the top priority. Mom, what are we going to do from now on? On the day of discharge, Jacob asked anxiously. It'll be okay. Mom will protect you. Emily promised while hugging her son. A new life was about to begin. It might be a difficult and arduous journey, but she was determined to walk it with her son. 6 months later, Michael received a 15-year prison sentence. The last time she saw her husband's face in court, there was no longer any trace of the man she had loved. There was only a cold man who had tried to sacrifice his son for money. 1 year later, Emily and Jacob had moved to a small town in Vermont. They wanted to get away from the painful memories in Connecticut and start a new life together. Emily began working at a local real estate company, and Jacob made friends at his new school and gradually regained his brightness. Today was the first sports day at the new school. Emily took the day off work from early morning to cheer for her son. Previously, she would have prioritized work, but now it was different. She had learned through painful experience that time with her son was more important than anything. Mom, watch me. I'm going to come in first in the relay this time. Jacob waved excitedly at his mother. Since the incident a year ago, her son had become introverted for a while, but in the new environment, he was gradually regaining his confidence. Counseling seemed to have been effective too, and he suffered from nightmares less often. In the spectator stands of the athletic field, Emily sat alongside other parents. The people in the new town were warm, accepting the mother and son without prying into their past. Go, Jacob! Emily cheered loudly for her son. When Jacob received the baton in the relay, loud cheers rose from the spectator stands too. Her son ran with all his might and brilliantly led his team to victory. I did it! The moment he crossed the finish line, Jacob raised both hands high toward his mother in the stands. Tears welled up in Emily's eyes. She truly felt the happiness of being able to see her son smile. When the sports day ended, Jacob came running over. "Mom, did you see? I came in first. I saw. It was wonderful." Emily hugged her son. His small, sweaty body was full of vitality. Thinking about how she had almost lost this child a year ago, she understood how precious this moment was. On the way home, Jacob said while walking, "Mom, just the two of us is enough." Emily was surprised by her son's words. "Why do you say that?" "Because you put me first. Before. I felt like the previous dad didn't really look at me." Jacob's words didn't directly touch on the incident a year ago, but it was clear that he understood many things in his own way. "Yes. We're happy, just the two of us." Emily squeezed her son's hand back. She had learned over this year that a true family is determined not by the depth of blood ties, but by the depth of caring hearts. That night, after Jacob had fallen asleep, Emily sat alone drinking coffee and reflecting on the past. Letters from Michael arrived once a month, but she threw them away without opening them. Her relationship with him was completely over. Meanwhile, at that time, at Connecticut State Prison, Michael Harrison spent each day in a solitary cell. He was despised by other inmates as a child killer and often suffered violence. The guards' protection was limited, and he lived in constant fear. "A guy like you has no value in living," a prisoner sitting next to him in the cafeteria threatened in a low voice. Michael could say nothing and continued eating silently. Of his 15-year sentence, only 1 year had passed. These hellish days would continue for another 14 years. Returning to his cell, Michael stared at a photo of his son. All the letters he sent to Emily came back returned. He would probably never see his family again. It was the punishment for trying to sacrifice his son for money. In the middle of the night, Michael cried alone. He finally understood the magnitude of what he had lost. But it was too late to take it back. He had no choice but to spend the rest of his life atoning for the consequences of his foolish choice. In the small house in Vermont, Emily and Jacob spent a peaceful night. Listening to his mother's bedtime story, Jacob fell asleep with a peaceful expression. "Good night, Jacob." Emily kissed her son's forehead. She was glad she had been able to protect this child. And she had learned what true family bonds were. Deep love and trust that comes after overcoming difficulties. That was the true form of family. Outside the window, a sky full of stars spread out. As if blessing the beginning of a new life, the stars shone gently.